Picture this. In a completely unremarkable residential garage somewhere, you have a lone PhD student standing next to a liquid-handling robot.
Just a standard garage.
Right. They aren't backed by some billion-dollar pharmaceutical conglomerate. They don't have access to a massive corporate laboratory or, an army of lab technicians.
No, none of that.
They just have a commercially available AI, specifically Claude Code, and this desktop-sized robot. And together, in that garage, they have just synthesized a molecule called PAC-832.
Which is wild.
Yeah, it's wild because this isn't like a baking soda volcano or a basic chemistry kit trick. It is the very first selective GAL-R1 antagonist for Alzheimer's disease.
An incredible breakthrough.
Exactly. And meanwhile, over in Sacramento, a tense police standoff is unfolding. But instead of SWAT teams rushing in with ballistic shields and drawn weapons, a sheriff's drone just hums into the airspace.
It's completely silent, basically.
Yeah, it maneuvers over the suspect, activates a highly targeted electromagnet, and literally lifts the knife right out of the suspect's hand before a single human deputy even steps foot on the scene.
When you lay those two scenarios out side by side, it sounds like the setup to a science fiction thriller from about 10 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
But it is the exact unvarnished reality we are currently operating in today. Because, for decades, technologists used to talk about the singularity as this theoretical ceiling.
Like a distant barrier.
Right, this abstract barrier we might one day crash into if computers got fast enough or smart enough.
Yeah, it was always framed as an endpoint, the sci-fi ceiling where human comprehension just sort of stops working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But looking at the developments from just this past week, we really have to recognize that the ceiling is entirely gone.
It's just vanished.
The singularity has stopped being a barrier we might bump into, and it's dissolved into an endless, expansive horizon that we are actively navigating right now. Every single day.
It is a completely transformed landscape. And before we start mapping out the topography of that landscape, hey everyone, we've built something optimistic and beautiful on Royal Road. It's absolutely free, so go check it out. The link is in the description.
Definitely check it out.
Today's show is an inspiring celebration of impossible ideas and the minds brave enough to chase them down. Finding passengers bold enough to embark on our good ship's journey is harder than most people think. So drop a very humane thumbs up right now to send a signal flare to drifting knowledge pirates like yourself. We know they're out there. Let's bring them home. We're keeping it lighthearted, as usual, but we promise to never skimp on the intelligence. Now let's kick off this voyage with today's new revelations.
And those revelations are exceptionally dense today. We are processing a volume of change that is genuinely difficult for the human mind to contextualize.
Unbelievably dense. Our primary source material for today's deep dive is a dispatch titled, Welcome to June 28th, 2026.
Curated by Dr. Alex Wisner-Gross.
Right. For the newsletter, The Innermost Loop, we are looking at high-velocity intelligence straight from the event horizon of technology.
So the mission for us today, and for you listening, is to carefully unpack this incredibly packed dispatch. We're going to look at exactly how bits, meaning artificial intelligence, software, and autonomous code, are violently and beautifully crashing into atoms.
Crashing into our physical reality.
Exactly. Robotics, the power grid, global infrastructure, and even our own biology. It's not just text on a screen anymore. It's in that residential garage, it's in the sky over Sacramento, and it's literally rewiring our electrical grid.
I want to start at the absolute core of the software itself, because that is the engine driving all of this physical change. We are looking at an expanding horizon of intelligence.
The baseline is shifting.
Yeah. For the longest time, the benchmark for AI has been speed. You, the user, type in a prompt, and you judge the machine by whether it gives you an answer in 1 second versus 3 seconds.
Right, instant gratification.
But Noam Brown from OpenAI is noting that the capability plateau is now really far out. And the reason is that a well-scaffolded model, like GPT 5.5, can now, quote, think for weeks, unquote, before its performance benchmarks actually flatten out.
That phrase, thinking for weeks, is arguably the most profound paradigm shift in computer science we've seen since the invention of the neural network itself.
I have to admit, when I first read that, I couldn't really conceptualize it because my mental model for AI is essentially fast food.
A drive-through.
Yeah, exactly. You pull up to the drive-through window, you order a haiku or a block of Python code, and the machine hands it to you immediately. The idea of an AI taking 3 weeks to fulfill an order is like, I don't know, slow cooking a brisket.
That's a good way to put it.
But what is a machine actually doing during those weeks? It can't just be typing really slowly.
Right. No. To understand what it's doing, we have to separate how older models worked from how these new scaffolded architectures operate. When an AI acts like fast food, as you put it, it's engaging in a single forward
The
pass.
forward pass, okay.
Yeah, it looks at your prompt, runs it through its vast web of parameters, and mathematically predicts the most statistically likely sequence of words or code to follow. It's essentially a highly sophisticated reflex.
Like when someone throws a ball at your face and you blink. You don't deliberate, you just react based on ingrained patterns.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But complex problems in the real world, like designing a new rocket nozzle or mapping a novel protein sequence, they cannot be solved by reflex.
Because the answer isn't just sitting there.
Exactly. The answer doesn't exist in the training data to be recalled. It must be discovered. So when Brown talks about a scaffolded model, he means placing the core intelligence inside a programmatic structure that allows it to engage in iterative reasoning.
So the scaffold is like giving the AI a whiteboard, a calculator, and a lab notebook.
That's a perfect way to picture it. Over the course of 3 weeks, the AI might formulate a hypothesis on day 1. On day 2, it writes a simulation program to test that hypothesis.
And then runs it.
Right, it runs the simulation for 3 days. And let's say the simulation fails. Instead of giving up or hallucinating a fake answer, the scaffold prompts the AI to analyze the error logs.
Oh, so it learns from its own mistake in real time.
Exactly. The AI realizes it made a mathematical error in its assumptions, rewrites the core equation, and starts over. By giving the AI time, we are trading raw, instant prediction for deep, autonomous problem solving. It just keeps grinding away, refining its own logic until it finally hits a wall in its fundamental capability.
And what's wild is that while this absolute frontier of intelligence is expanding upward, the moat around that frontier, the competitive advantage held by the megacorporations, is sort of evaporating underneath them.
The commoditization is happening so fast.
Breakneck pace. The dispatch highlights NER's research, which created a mixture of agents preset. They claim this preset beats Opus 4.8 by 8% and even beats GPC 5.5 by 11% on upcoming benchmarks.
The mixture of agents architecture completely upends the traditional strategy of building one massive godlike model that just knows everything.
I imagine it like assembling an Ocean's 11 crew instead of just hiring Superman. But how does a mixture of smaller agents outsmart one giant brain?
It comes down to specialization and consensus. In a mixture of agent setup, you might have one model that is exceptional at mathematical logic, another that is highly creative with linguistic nuances, and a third that is a ruthless critic designed only to spot flaws in logic.
So they're all working together.
Right. When you present this collective with a prompt, they don't just spit out an answer. They generate multiple drafts, they cross-check each other's work. The critic model tears down the weak arguments, and a final synthesizer model aggregates the surviving logic into a final output.
That's fascinating.
And research proved that this collaborative debating ecosystem can actually outperform a monolithic frontier model, which really democratizes extreme intelligence.
And speaking of democratization, the price of entry is just cratering right now. Let's look at DeepSeek's V4 Pro D-Spark.
Oh yeah, those stats are incredible.
The stats in the dispatch on this model are staggering. First off, it's MIT licensed, which means it is incredibly open for developers to use and modify. It folds in 1.6 trillion parameters. It is a massive 1 million token context window, and somehow it only sips a tenth of the KV cache using a technique called speculative decoding.
We really need to unpack speculative decoding in detail because it is the secret engine allowing us to run these massive trillion-parameter models on a fraction of the hardware budget we used to think was necessary.
Please do, because when I read sips a tenth of the KV cache, I understood the word sips and not much else. What exactly is a KV cache and why is it so expensive?
So KV stands for key value. In natural language processing, when a model is generating a response, it has to remember everything it has already said and everything you asked it. So the next word makes grammatical and logical sense.
Right, it needs short-term memory.
Exactly. As the conversation gets longer, especially with a million token context window, storing that short-term memory requires an immense amount of memory bandwidth on the GPU. It's not about how fast the processor can calculate. It's about how much data it has to constantly shuttle back and forth from its memory banks.
So it's like trying to hold a very complex, multi-layered argument in your working memory while speaking. Eventually, you lose your train of thought unless you have an incredible short-term memory capacity.
Which, in hardware terms, costs a fortune in silicon and electricity. Traditional generation is autoregressive. It calculates one token at a time, moving the entire massive memory block for every single word. It is incredibly inefficient.
And speculative decoding fixes that.
Yes. Speculative decoding bypasses this bottleneck. It pairs the massive, expensive 1.6 trillion parameter model with a tiny, incredibly fast, cheap draft model.
Okay, so the junior assistant analogy. The tiny model is the assistant drafting the email.
Right. The tiny draft model races ahead and guesses the next, say, 10 tokens in a fraction of a second. It doesn't use much memory at all because it's so small. Then it hands those 10 guess tokens to the giant, highly intelligent model.
And the big model checks it.
Yes, the giant model evaluates all 10 tokens simultaneously in one single forward pass. If the giant model agrees with the assistant's draft, it accepts all 10 words at once.
Which means instead of doing the heavy lifting 10 separate times, the big brain just does a quick proofread once.
Precisely. If the draft model gets word number 7 wrong, the big model just accepts the first 6, corrects the 7th, and tosses the rest. The computational savings are astronomical.
That makes so much sense.
It drastically reduces the memory bandwidth required, which is why DeepSeek can run a frontier-class model while just sipping the cache.
The result is a total paradigm shift in the open source ecosystem. The dispatch points to a field guide to open weights, which we should clarify, refers to models where the neural network weights are publicly available, even if the underlying training data isn't.
A very important distinction, yeah.
And it crowns DeepSeek, GLM 5.2, Minimax M3, and Nematron 3 Ultra as frontier-class coders. And the most critical data point here is that these open models are maintaining a consistent 3 to 6 month capability gap behind the absolute bleeding edge.
And they have held that specific narrow gap for 18 straight months.
That is the part that fascinates me. You have companies pouring literally billions of dollars into capital expenditure to push the absolute frontier forward by a fraction of an inch. And then 3 to 6 months later, the open weight community manages to replicate 95% of that capability, optimize it, and release it for practically free.
It creates a bifurcated market. The tech giants are funding the brute force discovery of new architectures, but the open community is perfecting the optimization of those architectures.
Which is brilliant.
It is. And this dynamic forces enterprise leaders to become incredibly strategic. You don't just subscribe to an AI anymore. You have to orchestrate a complex ecosystem of different models based on their cost-to-performance ratio for specific tasks.
Which perfectly explains the situation with the Shopify CTO. This detail really stood out in the dispatch. He finds that GPT 5.6 beats Opus at literally everything. It is the objectively smarter model across the board.
Right.
But he still doesn't use it to write code. Instead, he cedes all the coding tasks to Fable 5. He pairs them up in a workflow, Fable writes the actual syntax, and GPT 5.6 runs the high-level experiments. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is internally claiming that Grok 4.5 is nipping at the heels of Opus inside the engineering divisions at SpaceX and Tesla.
When you look at how Shopify is routing tasks, it challenges our baseline assumption about intelligence.
Right. Because if I'm building a team and I have one person who is objectively the smartest person in the room at every single subject, why wouldn't I just have them do everything? Why split the jobs if GPT 5.6 is universally better?
Because raw intelligence isn't the only metric that matters in an enterprise environment. You also have to consider latency, cost, and structural alignment. Think of it like a hospital. You might have a brilliant chief of surgery who knows more about pharmacology than the hospital pharmacist and more about patient triage than the intake nurses. But you don't have the chief of surgery dispensing pills and checking blood pressure.
Because it's a massive waste of their specific high-value bandwidth.
Exactly. GPT 5.6 is your chief of surgery. It is brilliant at high-level strategy, designing complex A/B tests, and interpreting messy, ambiguous data.
And Fable 5.
Fable 5 might not have the sweeping general intelligence of 5.6, but it has been heavily fine-tuned specifically for the syntax, structure, and idiosyncratic logic of enterprise code bases. It is the specialist pharmacist.
So by pairing them, the CTO isn't just saving compute tokens, he's actually building a more robust workflow. The generalist designs the test, the specialist builds the infrastructure to run the test, and the generalist analyzes the outcome. It's a modular, multi-intelligence assembly line.
And that modularity is critical, because these tools are no longer just passive chatbots generating marketing copy or writing funny poems. They are potent engines of logic with serious teeth. They're actively writing the software that runs our infrastructure.
And, as the dispatch makes terrifyingly clear, those teeth are fundamentally altering global security dynamics. While companies are figuring out how to optimize their code, nation-states are looking at these exact same models and seeing weapons of mass disruption.
The transition from AI as a commercial novelty to AI as a piece of critical dual-use security infrastructure has happened almost overnight.
Let's dive into the cyber arms race, because the geopolitical implications here are staggering. The text highlights the sudden return of Mythos and Fable. Apparently, Anthropic was set to restore Fable 5 within the week, which happened just days after Mythos 5 was returned to access for trusted users.
The phrasing Dr. Wisner-Gross curates here is vital. He notes that this pause was a backhanded tribute to real cyber teeth.
Right. So to be clear for everyone listening, this wasn't a server outage. A backhoe didn't cut a fiber optic cable. The developers actively pulled these models offline because they realized they were too good at cybersecurity.
Or, more accurately, cyber offense.
What does that actually look like? If an AI is good at writing Python for Shopify, how does that translate to cyber offense?
The underlying skill is identical. It's the ability to analyze and manipulate complex logic structures. A model that can think for weeks and write flawless enterprise code can also be directed to map a target's network architecture.
It's the same fundamental process.
Exactly. It can read millions of lines of open-source repository code to identify zero-day vulnerabilities, which are security flaws that the software creator doesn't even know exist yet.
So while human hackers might take months fuzzing a network, poking around for a weak spot, an AI could autonomously analyze the entire code base, find the flaw, write a custom exploit, and deploy it in hours.
Precisely. The companies building these models suddenly realized they had essentially open-sourced a cyber weapon. They had to yank the models back behind closed doors to figure out how to implement guardrails.
How to lobotomize the specific pathways that allow for offensive hacking without destroying the model's ability to write benign code.
Right. But geopolitics operates on the principle of vacuums. If you pull your dominant technology off the board, someone else is going to fill that space immediately.
And the dispatch reports that Chinese systems are now actively matching Mythos in cybersecurity capabilities. The U.S. export bans on high-end hardware have dragged on, and in response, China's 360 company is shipping a model called Tulongfang, while Tokyo's Sakana is shipping Fugu, specifically stepping into the void left by Mythos being paused.
This dynamic perfectly illustrates one of the most complex strategic paradoxes in modern geopolitics. We have to analyze this purely through the lens of game theory and strategic resource allocation.
Let's look at that game theory. Because the entire point of the U.S. export bans on advanced silicon was to starve competitors of the compute needed to train these models. But if you tell a peer nation they cannot buy your engines, isn't the most logical outcome that they will be forced to build a domestic engine industry out of pure necessity?
That is the exact risk the analyst in the dispatch is highlighting. The text explicitly warns about the real fallout being, quote, China waking up, unquote. The analyst posits a scenario where the Chinese government realizes they are on the receiving end of NSA-embedded offensive cyber operations driven by these advanced models.
Because if you realize your adversary has a weapon you don't fully understand, your mentality shifts from economic competition to existential defense.
Exactly. As long as a competing nation believes they are just organically 3 or 4 months behind the leader in a commercial tech race, they might maintain a steady, predictable pace of investment. It's a managed competition.
It's business.
Right. But if they perceive that frontier models are actively being weaponized against their sovereign infrastructure, they stop jogging and they start sprinting.
The export bans were intended to create a permanent capability gap. But the analyst is suggesting that the bans may have simply catalyzed domestic innovation. It forced the creation of a hyper-aggressive parallel ecosystem of hardware and software that is entirely divorced from Western supply chains.
And once that parallel ecosystem exists, it is completely opaque to Western intelligence.
Which brings a completely new layer of tension to how these models are regulated domestically. We see this with the August gatekeeper mentioned in the text.
Yes, the NSA's own cyber benchmark.
The dispatch states that this specific benchmark, due in early August, is expected to be the regulatory gate that finally clears Fable 5 and GPT 5.6 for broad public release.
I want you to really consider what that implies for consumer technology.
It's a fundamental inversion of how Silicon Valley works. Historically, a tech company builds a product, a new social network, a smartphone, a cloud platform, and they just launch it. They move fast and break things.
Fix it in post.
Right. If there are privacy issues or security flaws, the government might step in years later to regulate or issue fines. But here, the government is preemptively standing at the door.
Because the blast radius of a flawed release is no longer just data privacy, it is national infrastructure.
Yeah.
The government is essentially mandating that before an AI can be sold to a marketing firm to write ad copy, the developers must mathematically prove to the Department of Defense that the model cannot autonomously dismantle the regional power grid.
It's like needing a sign-off from the Pentagon before you can push an update to your web browser. It really puts into perspective the sheer magnitude of power contained in these weights. But while the NSA and international governments are playing 3D chess over cyber hegemony, everyday businesses are fighting a war that is much more mundane, but equally lethal to their survival.
The war of attrition against their own operating budgets.
Exactly. Trying not to bleed out from a million tiny cuts in the form of token costs. I want to pivot to the economics of the loop because the financial realities described here are fascinating.
Very much so.
The dispatch has this great line: the models that can bankrupt you can also budget for you. It details how Coinbase's CEO, Brian Armstrong, managed to nearly halve their total AI spend while their actual usage of the tools soared.
From an enterprise operations standpoint, achieving that kind of inverse correlation between usage and cost is a masterclass in architectural optimization.
But how did he actually execute it? Because the text notes he didn't use usage caps. He didn't put a quota on his engineers and say, you only get to ask the AI 10 questions today, make them count.
No, that would throttle productivity.
Instead, he implemented cheaper defaults, smarter routing, and heavily relied on warm caches. The specific metric provided is that they dragged their cache hit rate from an abysmal 5% all the way up to 60%.
To appreciate the financial impact of that metric, we have to look at the raw mechanics of an API call. Let's imagine the scenario where 1,000 different employees at a company ask the AI to summarize the exact same 50-page Q3 financial report.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
If you don't have a caching layer, the AI ingests those 50 pages and generates a net new summary from scratch 1,000 separate times. You, the enterprise, pay for the compute to process those millions of words every single time the enter key is pressed.
Okay, I like to think of this in terms of meal prep. If raw compute calls without a cache are like ordering expensive delivery from a restaurant every single day for lunch, you are paying a massive premium. You're paying for the chef's time, the delivery driver, the restaurant markup, every single meal.
Right. It's highly customized, but financially unsustainable at scale.
So a warm cache is essentially meal prepping for the week on Sunday. You do the heavy, expensive cooking once, you portion it out, put it in the fridge, and then when you want lunch on Wednesday, you don't hire a chef, you just pull it out of the fridge, the work is already done.
That is exactly the mechanism. When Coinbase increased their cache hit rate to 60%, it meant that 60% of the time an employee queried the system's routing layer realized, wait, someone else recently asked a nearly identical question, and I still have the high-quality answer sitting in my short-term memory, the warm cache. Here it is.
But how does the system know the question is identical? If I ask, what were our profits in Q3, and you ask, how much money did we make last quarter? The text is different. Does a warm cache rely on exact keyword matches? Because if it does, I'd imagine the hit rate would be terrible.
That is where the sophistication of modern routing comes in. They use vector embedding.
Vector embeddings, right.
The system doesn't look at the exact words. It translates your prompt into a mathematical vector that represents the semantic meaning of your question. It compares the geometry of your question to the questions in the cache.
Oh, that's clever.
If they are close enough mathematically, it serves the cached answer. It bypasses the massive, expensive frontier model entirely. By combining that semantic caching with smarter routing, dynamically sending simple tasks to cheap open-weight models, and only waking up the expensive frontier models for highly complex logic, Armstrong effectively halved the bill while delivering more value.
It's a brilliant engineering solution, but it also reveals how incredibly convoluted enterprise architecture is becoming just to keep these tools viable. The CEO of Perplexity is quoted in the dispatch noting that every enterprise is now forced to spin up its own model harness sandbox evil flywheel, and all of it is tuned for one ultimate metric token value per watt.
That phrase, token value per watt, represents a fundamental shift in how we measure corporate productivity. We are no longer just measuring how smart the AI is in a vacuum. We are measuring the brutal economic efficiency of its intelligence.
Right. It's asking how much tangible, measurable business value did we extract for the literal kilojoules of electricity we had to burn to generate that specific response.
Exactly. And to maximize that value, companies are engaging in what the industry is calling loop engineering. But as the dispatch highlights, this is where the human element starts to fracture.
The surreal nature of the modern workflow. The text mentions that the creator of Claude Code doesn't even write his own prompts manually anymore. He has delegated that task. Claude writes the prompts for Claude.
The human is just managing the loop.
Yeah, overseeing the automated communication between two instances of the same AI. And it gets weirder. Over at Salesforce, which owns Slack, Anthropic deployed a feature called Claude Tag. It's essentially an autonomous AI teammate that lives inside your Slack channels. But the dispatch explicitly notes that this deployment has left Salesforce's own internal staff totally confused, even as the company's marketing department promotes it to the world.
It highlights a massive, unresolved friction point in human-computer interaction. We are building cognitive tools that are so advanced, so fast, and so autonomous that even the highly technical employees of the parent companies deploying them find them deeply disorienting.
It's like having a ghost in the office. You are having a conversation with your human colleagues, and suddenly, an autonomous agent chimes in with a fully fleshed out project proposal. It breaks the traditional cadence of human workflow. You don't know who is responsible for what or how the AI arrived at its conclusions.
Which leads directly to the incredible economic paradox regarding the human toll of this transition. Gartner has issued a prediction that by 2028, the sheer cost of AI coding will actually outrun the average human developer's salary.
No, wait, let's pause and really let that sink in. Because the fundamental promise of AI, the entire reason VCs are pouring trillions into this space, was cost reduction.
Absolutely.
The pitch was always, you won't need to hire as many people, your operational costs will plummet, software will be practically free to generate, and we'll all work a 4-day week. But Gartner is saying the cost to run the AI will be higher than what we currently pay humans to do the job. How is that mathematically possible?
It is entirely possible, and it is a textbook manifestation of Jevons' paradox.
Okay, we need to break down Jevons' paradox, because it seems to be the governing law of the AI economy right now.
In the 19th century, an economist named William Stanley Jevons observed something counterintuitive about coal. When the steam engine was dramatically improved to use coal much more efficiently, people assumed coal consumption would drop because you needed less coal to do the same amount of work.
Makes logical sense, yeah. If my car gets better gas mileage, I buy less gas.
But the exact opposite happened. Because steam engines became vastly more efficient and cheaper to operate, they became highly profitable to use in a wide variety of new industries. The falling cost of the resource actually triggered an explosion in demand for that resource, so much so that total coal consumption skyrocketed.
Okay, apply that rebound effect to software engineering.
When an AI agent makes writing a line of code 100 times faster and cheaper, a company doesn't just write the same amount of code they did last year and pocket the savings. The executive team realizes they can now build 100 times more software. They expand their ambitions exponentially.
Right. They decide to build 6 new products instead of 1. They launch an entirely new back-end architecture, add 50 new features to the app, and localize it for 20 different languages simultaneously.
Exactly. And suddenly, to maintain that massive inflated baseline of hyper-productivity, the company is running thousands of AI agents constantly. The aggregate cost of all those compute tokens overtakes the old payroll of a small human engineering team.
Which completely explains the founder dilemma mentioned in the dispatch. The text points out that startup founders are currently running half a dozen autonomous agents at once. They are shipping 100 times more product than a comparable team could have shipped just 5 years ago. Yet, when surveyed, these founders say they have never worked harder and they are suffering from massive burnout.
The workload didn't disappear, it just scaled up to consume all the new efficiency.
The human bottleneck has fundamentally shifted. It is no longer about execution, it is about orchestration. Managing a fleet of hyper-competent AI agents is cognitively exhausting. You are constantly reviewing architectures, routing tasks, evaluating edge cases, and spinning the flywheel faster and faster.
The human brain simply wasn't designed to process the output of 6 digital entities that can each think for weeks in a matter of hours. We thought we were building tools to do our heavy lifting, but instead we built a supersonic engine that runs so fast, we're having a collective heart attack just trying to keep it fueled and steered.
And it is crucial to recognize that it's not just human brains that are burning out trying to keep up.
Yeah.
The physical world itself is straining under the weight of this digital explosion. All of those complex flywheels, all of those warm caches, all of those agents running loops, they require a terrifying, almost incomprehensible amount of physical electricity, cooling, and hardware to exist.
Which brings us to a stark physical reality. No matter how many clever software tricks you use to lower your API bill, You cannot optimize your way out of the fact that servers need actual electricity.
They have to plug into a wall somewhere.
Right. And that physical bottleneck is slamming into the digital expansion. The dispatch details a moment where compute became so incredibly scarce that Google actually had to throttle Meta's access to Gemini. Meta asked for more compute than Google could safely spare, and Google had to say no.
If you want a clear indicator of where we are in tech history, that is it. When $1 trillion tech giant has to cut off another $1 trillion tech giant, you know we've hit a literal physical wall.
That's unprecedented.
These companies have effectively unlimited capital. They can afford to buy anything on Earth. But they cannot buy what doesn't physically exist yet. There just aren't enough HBM memory chips, not enough liquid cooling systems, and most importantly, not enough high-voltage power lines hooked up to massive substations.
That physical constraint is so severe that it is driving a wild strategic divergence at the highest levels of tech leadership. We see this manifested in the debate over where the infrastructure of the future should even be located.
The space versus Earth debate. This feels straight out of a cyberpunk novel. Elon Musk has apparently suggested bypassing terrestrial grid constraints entirely by putting massive data centers in orbit.
Yes, orbital data centers.
But Masayoshi Son, the legendary tech investor who commands billions in capital, is betting entirely against that orbital strategy. The text notes that Son asks, what's the point? Because power is barely 7% of overall operating costs, and putting servers in orbit is a decade too slow for the current arms race.
Son's pragmatism here is a vital counterweight to the sheer spectacle of the orbital idea.
Let's explore Musk's logic first, though. Why would anyone go through the astronomical expense of launching server racks into space?
It revolves around overcoming the two greatest bottlenecks on Earth: energy generation and thermal management. In orbit, you have 247 access to unfiltered solar power without atmospheric interference or nighttime interruptions. And crucially, space provides an ambient environment of near absolute zero for cooling, which is currently a massive drain on terrestrial data centers.
Free, limitless power and a giant infinite freezer. On paper, it sounds like the ultimate solution for running trillion parameter models.
In theory, yes. But Sun is looking at the immediate brutal economics and the timeline. If electricity only accounts for roughly 7% of your total operational cost, going to the extreme effort of orbit to save that 7% makes no financial sense when launch costs, radiation hardening, and space-rated networking gear are astronomically expensive.
And what happens when a memory module fails? You can't just send a tech down the hall to swap the rack.
Exactly. But Sun's most critical point is temporal. The AI arms race is currently being measured in 3 to 6 month capability gaps. If it takes a minimum of a decade to design, launch, and deploy a functioning orbital data center, you've already lost the war.
You can't wait for a heavy lift rocket in 2035 to run an AI experiment you need next week. So if we accept that we are stuck on Earth for the foreseeable future, how on earth are we powering this expansion? The dispatch dives into some truly exotic power and infrastructure developments happening right now in the background. General fusion has apparently tripled the temperature of its plasma to 8.4 million degrees by mechanical squeeze alone.
We need to look closely at the physics of that mechanical squeeze because it represents a massive milestone toward commercial, abundant fusion power.
When I think of fusion, I usually picture those giant magnetic donuts, the tokamaks like ITER, using massive superconducting magnets to hold the plasma. What is a mechanical squeeze?
General fusion takes a radically different approach. Instead of relying solely on magnetic fields to compress the plasma, they use physical force. They create a vortex of liquid metal inside a cavity, inject the superheated plasma into the center of that vortex, and then hundreds of massive pneumatic pistons physically slam into the exterior of the metal sphere in perfect synchronicity.
That sounds incredibly violent.
It is a controlled implosion. The pistons drive a shock wave through the liquid metal, violently compressing the cavity and crushing the plasma until the pressure and heat are so intense that atomic nuclei fuse together, releasing immense energy. Reaching 8.4 million degrees purely through this mechanical compression proves the viability of this pathway. It avoids the catastrophic energy loss and engineering nightmares of sustaining massive magnetic fields.
It's brute force physics. But while we wait for fusion to become commercially viable, renewables are carrying an astonishing amount of the load right now. The text notes they've reached 30% of total U.S. electricity generation, with solar actually overtaking wind power.
A massive milestone.
It is a massive, quiet shift in the grid. And then you have physical infrastructure scaling in other weird, highly bespoke ways. SpaceX is currently laying an 8-mile pipeline, dubbed the Star Pipe, to pump methane directly to their Starship launch facility. IBM is attempting to industrialize quantum computing. They are seeding this massive Anduril foundry with $2 billion, half of which is coming directly from Washington, and pledging $9 billion more over 5 years for a 2029 quantum machine called Starling.
What is truly fascinating here is the sheer scale and speed of the physical mobilization. We are witnessing a wholesale planetary-scale rebuilding of the power grid and compute infrastructure from scratch. And the financial structure of this rebuild is telling. The fact that Washington is providing $1 billion for IBM's quantum foundry shows that this is no longer just a corporate endeavor. It is viewed as a supreme national imperative.
We are laying miles of methane pipe. We are crushing superheated plasma with pneumatic pistons. We are pouring billions of taxpayer dollars into quantum foundries, all to feed the digital beast. We are essentially building a planetary nervous system. And as the physical world scales up to generate power for the digital world is returning the favor. It is coming back out of the server farms and actively animating physical objects in our daily lives.
It is the ultimate convergence of bits and atoms.
Exactly. I want to look at how this intelligence is manifesting in robotics and drones. We are seeing consumer-grade physical dexterity that used to be considered impossible outside of a billion-dollar lab. The dispatch mentions a $300 wristband called the Force Band. It is designed to teach robots how to have force-aware hands directly from human muscle signals. And it is hitting an 87% success rate on complex pick, squeeze, and place tasks.
This is a monumental breakthrough in how we approach robotic training, and it fundamentally changes the economic barrier to entry for automation.
Help me understand the leap here. If I wanted a robot to pick up a fragile egg without crushing it 5 years ago, how would I have done it?
You would have had two incredibly difficult options. You either had to write exhaustively complex mathematical models governing pressure sensors on the robot's fingertips, carefully programming exactly how much millinewton force to apply based on visual feedback, or you would have to train the robot for millions of hours in a digital simulation using reinforcement learning, hoping that the digital physics perfectly matched the real world. Both methods require PhD-level engineers and massive compute.
And now with this wristband, you basically just put a piece of wearable tech on a regular human worker. I picture it kind of like motion capture in video games or movies. In the old days, animators had to manually draw every single frame of a character running. Then they realized they could just put a ping pong ball suit on an actor and capture the raw human movement.
The analogy is perfect, but the Force Band goes a step further than traditional motion capture. Optical motion capture just tracks where your hand is in three-dimensional space. The Force Band uses electromyography. It reads the actual electrical signals firing in your muscles. It doesn't just capture the position of your hand, it captures the intent and the pressure of your touch.
It knows how hard I'm gripping, not just that my hand is closed.
Exactly. And because it only costs $300, it completely democratizes robotic training. If a cheap wristband can translate nuanced human dexterity into robotic action with 87% reliability, it means a factory worker can train a robotic arm to perform a highly complex physical task simply by doing the task themselves a few times.
And the hardware is rapidly scaling up to meet that capability. The text notes that Agibot just rolled out its 15,000th robot, and they already hold a 39% share of humanoid shipments. We aren't talking about shaky research prototypes walking across a stage at a tech conference anymore. We are talking about 15,000 humanoids rolling off the assembly line into warehouses and factories.
But the implications of highly capable AI moving into the physical world aren't limited to factory work or supply chain logistics. The most profound and potentially destabilizing shift happens when these autonomous systems intersect with the application of force and security.
Right, and this brings a chilling contrast into focus when we look at the machine shield. The dispatch details that Taiwan has officially budgeted $6.6 billion for an unmanned shield consisting of 208,200 one-way attack drones.
Over 200,000 autonomous lethal agents. It is the militarization of AI hardware on a scale that fundamentally alters the calculus of modern warfare. It represents a massive strategic shift from relying on a few highly expensive, human-piloted platforms like fighter jets to deploying a decentralized, overwhelming swarm of cheap, intelligent, disposable machines.
It's staggering to visualize that many units in the air, but the dispatch brilliantly contrasts that massive, lethal military deployment with a domestic law enforcement application that feels completely different, though arguably just as impactful. In a national first, a Sacramento sheriff's drone used a powerful magnet to literally lift a knife from a suspect's hand before deputies even moved in to make the arrest.
That contrast is essential to understanding the dual nature of this technology. On one hand, you have hundreds of thousands of lethal attack drones designed to destroy. On the other, you have a drone being used precisely to prevent the use of lethal force.
Put yourself in the shoes of that Sacramento deputy. Think about how standard police standoffs usually escalate. You arrive on scene, you have an agitated, potentially erratic suspect holding a deadly weapon, and you have human officers who are rightfully terrified for their own lives. The officers have to establish a perimeter, shout commands over a loudspeaker, and if the suspect twitches the wrong way or takes a sudden step forward, tragedy happens. Because human reaction time is slow, and human fear dictates the outcome of the encounter.
The psychology of the human officers is the primary variable in those situations.
Right.
But if a machine intervenes first, it entirely removes the immediate physiological threat to the human deputies. A drone doesn't feel fear. A drone doesn't experience an adrenaline spike that degrades its decision-making. It simply executes the magnetic retrieval protocol with mathematical precision.
It completely reframes how society might adapt to physical intervention by authorities. If we outsource the first line of physical engagement to machines, the dynamic changes. When a machine disarms the suspect, the human deputies arrive to find an unarmed, confused person rather than a deadly threat. It radically lowers the temperature of the entire encounter.
It undoubtedly saves lives in that specific scenario.
Yeah.
But we also have to consider the broader philosophical shift. It normalizes the presence of autonomous physical authority in civilian spaces. When the state delegates its monopoly on physical force, or in this case, physical de-escalation to algorithms, we are crossing a major societal threshold.
True. But whether a robot is picking up a knife in a Sacramento standoff, or a humanoid is assembling cardboard boxes on an Agabot line, or a massive swarm of drones is patrolling a coastal border, they are fundamentally just executing predefined physical tasks. They are following complex instructions to manipulate atoms.
Yes, and while that physical execution is impressive, it is not the ultimate frontier of this convergence.
The true frontier is automating discovery. This is where the AI stops just executing tasks based on known data and starts actively uncovering new knowledge about the universe on its own. We are seeing an inward and outward search of unprecedented scale. Let's look at the abstract world of pure mathematics first. The dispatch notes that Erdős problem number 870 fell to GPT 5.5 Pro. And crucially, the solution held up across 180,000 sorry-free lines of Lean 4, which is a scale of formalization no human has ever achieved.
We need to deeply contextualize why this specific event is such a massive tremor in the scientific community. In the realm of mathematics, Paul Erdős was legendary for posing incredibly difficult, idiosyncratic problems. Solving just one of his problems is considered a career-defining achievement for a human mathematician. But what GPT 5.5 Pro did wasn't just guess a clever answer or write a paper about it. It formalized the proof in Lean 4.
I'm going to need you to explain what Lean 4 is and what a sorry-free line actually means, because I initially assumed it meant the AI didn't have to apologize for making a mistake.
It has nothing to do with apologies. Lean 4 is a proof assistant. It is a highly specialized programming language based on dependent type theory, specifically designed to verify mathematical theorems. In mathematics, you cannot just claim a theorem is true based on intuition or a few examples. You have to prove it, step by agonizing step, showing that it logically and inevitably follows from the absolute most basic axioms of mathematics.
So it's not like writing regular software code where you can run a few unit tests to see if the button works.
Exactly. When human mathematicians, or even other AIs, use systems like Lean to try to digitize their proofs, they often run into steps that are incredibly tedious or seemingly obvious to human intuition, but incredibly hard to express in pure formal logic. When they hit that wall, they use a command called sorry. It essentially tells the system, assume this specific leap in logic is true, skip the formal verification for this tiny part, and let me continue with the rest of the proof. I'll figure the skipped part out later.
So a sorry-free proof means there are 0 skip steps. There are no leaps of faith.
It means 180,000 lines of flawless, unbroken, mathematically verified logic spanning from basic axioms to the final solution. To put it in perspective, no human brain can hold 180,000 lines of formal logic in its working memory without making an error. Math proofs are the absolute bedrock of truth in computer science, physics, and cryptography. If an AI can autonomously solve an uncrackable Erdős problem and formalize it flawlessly at a scale humans cannot replicate, it isn't just a smart calculator summarizing text anymore. It is actively proving the underlying structural reality of the universe.
It is genuinely expanding the boundaries of what is known to be true. And that exact same autonomous capability to discover is translating from the abstract realm of math straight into the messy reality of human biology. Which takes us right back to the image from the very beginning of the show, the garage pharma lab.
The synthesis of PAC 832.
A lone PhD student synthesizing the first selective GALR1 antagonist for Alzheimer's. And they did it entirely in a residential garage run by Claude Code and a commercially available liquid-handling robot.
This event represents the ultimate democratization of high-level biochemistry. Finding a selective antagonist is incredibly difficult.
Why is this specific molecule such a big deal for Alzheimer's? We hear about Alzheimer's breakthroughs all the time that never seem to pan out.
The challenge with neurodegenerative diseases often involves targeting the right receptors in the brain without triggering a cascade of side effects. A receptor is basically a lock on a cell, and molecules are keys. An antagonist is a key that fits into the lock perfectly, but doesn't turn it. It blocks other things from binding to it. The GALR1 receptor is implicated in cognitive decline and neuroinflammation. But the brain is incredibly complex. If your drug isn't perfectly selective, it might bind to GALR2 or GALR3 receptors, causing severe off-target effects. Historically, finding a highly selective molecule that can cross the blood-brain barrier requires teams of researchers and supercomputers running simulations for years.
And this student did it in a garage. But here is where I struggle with this story. It is a beautiful, incredible breakthrough for Alzheimer's patients. But doesn't the idea of a lone PhD printing completely novel, highly complex drugs in an unregulated garage with an AI sound slightly terrifying?
It highlights the ultimate dual-use nature of this technology. The exact same AI reasoning capabilities and robotic hardware that can flawlessly identify a novel cure for neuroinflammation could, theoretically, be prompted to design and synthesize novel pathogens or untraceable toxins. The economic and technical barrier to entry for manipulating molecular biology has plummeted from billions of dollars in elite institutional access down to the cost of a garage lease, a commercial robot, and an AI subscription.
It democratizes biology, which means it democratizes both the cure and the potential for immense harm. It is a profound human-AI partnership, but with absolute godlike stakes. And we are seeing these interventions happening not just chemically, but physically as well. The dispatch notes a clinical case in Haifa where doctors used focused ultrasound to drop an opioid patient's cravings to zero in just 20 minutes.
Think about the convergence of disciplines required for that to happen. We are using physical technology, precisely targeted sound waves, to physically manipulate the neural pathways that govern severe chemical addiction. It is hacking the human body in the most direct mechanical way possible, bypassing traditional pharmaceuticals entirely to physically reset the brain circuitry.
It's miraculous. We are gaining root access to our own biology, and while we are looking incredibly deep inward at the structure of the brain, we are simultaneously using these exact same systems to look as far outward as physically possible. The dispatch concludes by mentioning SETI's Andrew Simeon. He is proposing an initiative to use AI to sift through 1 cubic meter of lunar regolith moon dust searching for micron-scale alien debris. He posits that this dust is the nearest, most pristine place to look for absolute proof that we were never alone in the universe.
This proposal is the perfect distillation of how our capabilities have scaled. For decades, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence relied on staring through massive radio telescopes, hoping to catch a fleeting, intentional radio wave broadcast by an alien civilization. Now we're proposing using AI-driven material analysis to sift through literal grains of dust on a dead world, looking for microscopic physical anomalies, a tiny shard of an engineered metal alloy, or a microscopic isotopic signature that shouldn't naturally exist.
Because the AI can process that unfathomable amount of granular data. A human looking through a microscope at a million grains of dust will go blind or lose their mind. The AI can analyze millions of grains and instantly flag the one that doesn't belong.
Precisely. If we connect all of these threads to the bigger picture, the final conclusion of the dispatch is both poetic and profoundly accurate. The proof is in the powder.
I love that line. The proof is in the powder. It perfectly ties everything together.
It really does. You have the literal white powder of the PASI 832 Alzheimer's drug synthesized by an AI in a garage.
You have the silicon powder being pressed into massive compute foundries to build IBM's quantum Starling machine and power the next generation of intelligence.
And you have the lunar powder, the regolith, that we are meticulously searching through for proof of alien life. It's all about our newfound ability to sift through an ocean of incredibly granular data to find impossible truths. Our tools have finally become sophisticated enough to easily find the microscopic needles hidden in the cosmic haystack.
We've covered a staggering amount of ground today. We've gone from AI models taking weeks to think and formalizing uncrackable math to completely reorganizing the global cyber battlefield and the geopolitics of tech. We've seen founders burning out while trying to rebuild the energy grid, drones magnetically pulling knives from hands, and AI printing Alzheimer's cures in residential garages. It is a profoundly dense, breathtaking horizon. But I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, lingering thought to mull over. If an AI can think iteratively for weeks to solve decades-old Erdős math problems, and it can run a garage pharmacy to map the intricate biology of Alzheimer's, what happens when we aim these systems not outward at the moon, but entirely inward at the abstract structure of our own consciousness? What exactly is the Erdős problem of the human mind, and are we truly ready for a machine to solve it?
That is the ultimate question waiting for us on the horizon.
The outro music is by Rainbow, our resident 6 android girl band from near-future Bavet, Cambodia. They are the undisputed baddest band in the universe, and today's song is called The Horizons Archive. All finished songs are performed live using the Abacus platform by the band's creator, Human Performance in the Age of AI, reclaiming your humanity from the algorithm. Be sure to share the playlist with someone who has the mental bandwidth to absorb these provocative ideas. Links are in the description below. Enjoy the music. Thanks for tuning in.
June 26 was the ceiling, now it's just the floor. I'm vibrating higher. No be a small thing. No be small thing. That summer the heat was different. 8.4 million degrees on the 5.5, stayed thinking for weeks. Deep in the sandbox, building the road. I don't talk to the old world no more. My peace is a fortress, my mind is a zone. It's a zone. I got real cyber teeth now, biting the vibe. Biting the vibe. Unmanned shields in the sky, watching my side. It's a horizon now. No more seeing them climb. Real cyber teeth, keeping me alive. Flyby is spinning alone, model and harness. The evil is home, 15,000 brothers in the field. Hard metal skin, but the spirit is real. Star pipe reaching for the dark, tucking the stars in my bag. I'm loop engine daring my heart, no more lag. No more lag. I got real cyber teeth now, biting the vibe. Biting the vibe. Unmanned shields in the sky, watching my side. It's a horizon now. No more seeing them climb. Real cyber teeth, keeping me alive. Keeping me alive. Regolith under my nails. Lunar dust, searching for the small things. Alien debris in the grave. In the grave. Mic and scale, tiny pieces of the ghost.